As climate change continues to take effect, we are seeing more and more severe storms ravage the world. Atmospheric rivers, which are rivers of moisture in the atmosphere, carry with them large amounts of water. While these rivers can certainly be vital to ending droughts and bringing much needed rainfall to certain areas, they also bring with them the potential to cause great floods. Japan's capital of Tokyo has had a long history with flooding and has taken great lengths to try and handle its frequent floods by constructing the famous GCAM project. The GCAM project is a series of massive tunnels underneath the city designed to divert any heavy rains away from the Edo River. This is not to say that flooding won't still be a problem for the city as it expands further outward. Massive drains that have been built underneath the city do not cover the more exterior regions of the city. This is going to be a problem as it is projected that the amount of storms and flooding will double in the next 13 years. Flooding is a very serious issue for Tokyo and Japan in general, as earlier this month a typhoon hit the city, leaving two dead, 4 missing, and 100 injured. It has also left over 200,000 homes without power. Tokyo is leading the way in terms of flood management, but even that giant effort may not be enough to hold back the rising waters. The Arctic is being hit particularly hard by the growing change in the world's climate. With the rise of global temperatures, the northern hemisphere has had the largest increase in average annual temperature. This increase is causing the ice to melt and recede northward. This receding ice is a particular problem for our furry white polar bear friends, who must cross the ice sheets to dry land for their seasonal feeding grounds. The more the ice recedes, the further and further they must swim every year. Warming waters will have a rather large effect on marine life, as warmer waters carry less oxygen that is vital for many Arctic marine species. The native population of the Arctic area is being affected by climate change in a negative way, as well as their traditional survival tactics no longer work, making them feel like strangers in their own land. Fortunately, there are many ways to stop or slow climate change from changing what and how you eat and Fortunately, there are many ways to stop or slow climate change, from changing what and how you eat to how many lights you have on in your home. Unfortunately, if we continue on this trend, we won't do enough fast enough, and much of our world will permanently change for the worse. Climate change will be the greatest challenge to the world that humanity will probably ever live through. As the planet warms, one of the biggest changes that we will face is the rising of the oceans. Nowhere is this more of a threat than the Guangzhou and Dong'an, two major cities in China's Pearl River Delta economic zone. These two cities being in the delta means that they are right at current sea levels, making them a high risk for floods and tropical storms. These problems will only increase as the oceans rise, as all current countermeasures would be completely overwhelmed in the future. If seas continue to rise, then this entire area could disappear beneath the waves, devastating the world economy and forcing millions to relocate in just these cities. In terms of environmental impact, there will be stronger and more deadly storms causing massive soil erosion, contamination of freshwater supplies, and as salt water reaches further inward. This area is massively important not just China, but the whole world, as it produces roughly 20% of China's GDP and roughly 4% of the world's GDP. The biggest issue facing this particular area is that most of its infrastructure is held in heavy machinery and chemical plants that cannot be moved on short notice. Many cities around the world are investing in flood prevention measures like flood walls, but many experts believe that any effort short of completely raising the city would be futile. Climate change is not all bad. Countries like Canada will become much warmer, allowing for a much longer growing season. Unfortunately, this is not the cause worldwide, as most of the land that we use for farming and other important practices is in some areas, and other important practices in some areas of the world are at extreme risk of changing forever. The Australian Murray-Darling River Basin is one of these areas being hit hard by the changing climate. The basin is extremely important to Australia as it is the home of 40% of the country's agriculture, including 100% of all rice grown, 80% of grapes grown, and roughly 40% of all dairy products produced. The basin also brings in $8 billion in tourism every year. The biggest problem facing the basin and the population of Adelaide, which resides close to the basin, is that more water is being used than is replenished each year. The rivers are drying up. The loss of water is especially dire for Adelaide, as it relies entirely on the basin for its water supply. The loss of water is also affecting the wildlife, as more water is taken from the natural habitat, and more of the natural habitat in the area shrinks. This means that there is less space for animals to reproduce, reducing their populations. This is especially important as there are over 35 endangered species in the basin at risk of going extinct. Currently, the country plans to enforce new laws limiting the amount of water that can be taken from the basin each year in an attempt to preserve the basin for the long term. As it stands, roughly 3.6 million people are at risk of not having enough water to survive on. The Netherlands is a country that is almost entirely below sea level and is at great risk of flooding because of this. The country is also facing much hotter summers, which is leaving some farming industries hurting as their growing seasons are shrinking. On average, the country has faced a temperature increase of 1.7 degrees, over double the global increase. This has had an interesting effect on rainfall in the country, as the amount of rainy days has decreased, but the amount of rain has increased, causing more floods. The government does not see an end to these worsening weather conditions. While flooding is definitely the biggest risk of the country, which is below sea level, the government says that the country is well prepared to deal with the rise in sea level. The Netherlands is a rich country that is very capable of building higher and better flood control and can handle the rise of 2 to 3 meters before truly facing a problem. Currently, the people living there are enjoying longer warm seasons, as the country is generally a much colder place to be. This warming has also caused an increase in tourism. As stated earlier, the Netherlands is one of the world leaders in flood control, and are even capable of pumping the water back out to sea. The country won't see a truly big flooding problem for some time yet. Russia is the single largest country on the planet, but it lies almost entirely at the northern edge of the world, facing bitter winters and shorter summers. In Russia, the temperature change from the seasons is very rapid, so there's really only 2 seasons in the country, summer and winter. The problem comes at the fact that Russia is one of the biggest producers of fossil fuels, and while the government has admitted that climate change is going to have a large and long-lasting negative effects on the country, they are refusing to stop their production of fossil fuels, most notably coal. Over recent years, Russia has faced an increase in temperature around 0.47 degrees Celsius per decade, which is 2.5 times faster than the global average. This increase in temperature is definitely significant for the country for a number of reasons, but most notably the melting of permafrost. Permafrost is permanently frozen soil that holds a large amount of greenhouse gases within it. Among the melting of the permafrost, Russia is also facing more drought, flooding, loss of biodiversity, and outbreaks of infectious diseases. There seems to be only more bad times ahead of Russia, and no sign that the government will do anything to try and change that outcome.